Part 1.
You will hear a woman asking for information over the phone. First, you have some time to look at questions 1 to 5. Now we shall begin. You should answer the questions as you listen, because you will not hear the recording a second time. Listen carefully and answer questions 1 to 5.
Good afternoon, Plainfield Community Centre.
Yes, hi. I'm new in town, and I was curious about the services the community centre has to offer.
We offer a variety of recreational activities. What were you interested in particular?
Well, everything, I guess. Okay, let's start with kids. I have a teenage son. What activities do you have for teens?
Right now, during the school year, we have tutoring sessions for children and teens in all subjects.
That would be good. He needs help with algebra.
We can certainly help with that. Just have him come by any Wednesday or Saturday afternoon. That's when the tutoring sessions are scheduled.
Fantastic! What about sports? Do you have sports activities for teens?
We have tennis lessons on Sunday mornings for teens and Sunday afternoon for adults.
I don't think my son would like that, but my husband might. For myself, I'd be more interested in yoga. Do you offer yoga classes?
We do. Our yoga classes take place on Tuesday and Thursday evenings. We divide it up into several groups, so there's one class for younger children, one for teens, and one for adults.
Really? I doubt my husband and son would be interested, but I'd like to sign up for yoga. I also like reading. Do you have any book clubs?
We have one just about to start. The first meeting will be next Friday morning. It will focus on early 20th century novels.
Too bad it's Friday morning. I think my son would enjoy it, but of course he's in school at that time.
Well, actually, that book club is for adults only. We may start one up for teens next summer, but we have nothing for that age group right now.
Oh well, I suppose he has enough to keep him busy for now. Now, what about fees? Do these classes and activities cost anything?
Before you hear the rest of the conversation, you have some time to look at questions 6 to 10. Now listen and answer questions 6 to 10.
There's a small charge for non-members for each class. However, they're all free to members. Would you be interested in becoming a member?
How much does the membership cost?
Not much at all. The yearly fee is $75 for individuals and $225 for families.
What do I get with the membership?
You get free access to all classes and activities, and you can use our facilities like the tennis court, the exercise room and the meeting room.
It's not a bad deal, really. Could you tell me exactly where the centre is located?
It's at 107 Elliott Street.
Is that Elliot with 2 L's or 1 L?
1 L. E-L-I-O-T. It's right downtown.
I think I know where it is. Do you have free parking?
Yes. You can park just across the street. There's a garage there.
That sounds easy enough. Maybe I'll come in one day next week and sign up for some classes.
That would be fine. But don't come on Monday because we're closed that day. We're open Tuesday through Sunday.
Oh, thanks for telling me. Maybe I'll stop in on Tuesday then. Can I pay for the classes with a personal check?
We accept checks and credit cards.
Okay, thank you very much. You've been very helpful.
That is the end of part 1.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Now turns to part 2. Part 2.
You will hear an extract from a talk about the Scottish Highlands.
First, you have 30 seconds to look at questions 11 to 18.
Today I have with me Moira Mackenzie, the author of several books in a well-known series of travel guides, and she'll be talking about what is probably the most fascinating wildlife area in Europe, the Scottish Highlands. Moira.
Yes, that's right. And it's a wonderful place to visit with lots to do in an area that makes up over half of Scotland. Including the 790 islands that lie scattered around the coast, it covers 39,000 square kilometres. Getting there is easy. From here in Glasgow, a good starting point is Fort William on the west coast, with regular bus and rail services linking the two. I'd recommend the train, which takes 4 hours to get there. Alternatively, you can take the Highland Line, which takes the more easterly route up to Inverness. That, in fact, is a bit quicker, taking around 3.5 hours to cover the 280 kilometres from here. There are also 2 main options by road. You can take either the A9 up through Stirling and Perth and then on to Inverness, or else on the west there's the A82 which runs up to Fort William and then, if you want, on to Inverness. Now, a lot of people associate the Highlands with bitterly cold weather, but in fact the region has a generally mild climate as a result of being surrounded on 3 sides by sea, particularly the warm waters of the Atlantic. At sea level in the west, for instance, the temperature ranges on average from a minimum of 1 degree centigrade in January up to 18 in July, and you can actually see palm trees growing there. Obviously, though, the temperatures will be lower inland and on higher ground. You can expect it to rain a lot too, particularly in the west, where annually as much as 2,000 millimetres regularly falls, though this helps account for the rich variety of vegetation and wildlife. When you get there, you'll find there are plenty of reasonably priced places to stay. In Fort William, for instance, you can find a room for the night in a small hotel or a bed and breakfast for just £25, or for £28 to £30 in Inverness. It's probably a good idea to book ahead though, especially in the summer months. With all the leisure, sports and cultural activities on offer, the towns are becoming increasingly popular with visitors. For example, accommodation in Inverness won't be at all easy to find this year around the 23rd of July, as that's when the local Highland Games will take place. So, if your aim is to see the countryside, it may be best to stay in a small village.
Now you have some time to look at questions 19 and 20.
As I mentioned, there's a huge range of wildlife in the Highlands, but for those visiting the area, there are some basic ground rules that are essential if we are to protect it. Firstly, you should make every effort not to disturb birds and animals, and one way of doing this is to blend in with your surroundings, for instance by avoiding brightly coloured garments such as orange anoraks. To see wildlife clearly, it's best to use binoculars, keeping your distance. This is particularly important during the breeding season. Wherever possible, use a hide so that they are less likely to detect your presence. Surprising though it may seem, visitors are advised to use their cars where no purpose-built hides are available, as people are apparently less likely to startle animals if they stay inside their vehicles. You may even find that creatures come up close to where you're parked, in which case, wait until they've gone before you move off. It should really go without saying that it's essential to be as quiet as possible, though sadly some people need reminding of this. Oh, and one other thing. Wild animals and pets don't mix, so please leave your dog at home or at least somewhere he or she can't chase the wildlife or damage their habitat.
That is the end of part 2.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Now turns to part 3. Part 3.
You will hear part of a lecture about studying history.
First, look at questions 21 to 23. As you listen, answer the questions.
Good morning, everybody. I'd like to begin this term's lectures with a discussion of the various sub-disciplines in history. Before I do that, though, can I refer you to the handout you picked up on the way in? It deals with two general topics. The first is, why study history? And the second is, what is history? Neither of these questions has an easy answer. In fact, people have been asking these questions for as long as history has been studied. However, as you are mostly new students to this subject, and we have some students of economics with us also, I feel you should have some background to these basic questions. Anyway, it's all in the handout. I might add that, for me personally, the most important reason for studying history is that I find it exciting. Our ancestors can remain, if we want them to, a mystery, a closed book, a blackness that we never see into, or we can come to know what motivated them and discover how that led to the world we live in today.
Before the conversation continues, look at questions 24 to 30. Now listen to the second part of the discussion.
You who have chosen to pursue the study of history are very fortunate. This is a time when we can talk not just about history, but histories. Traditionally, history was seen as one subject, and the subject matter was clear. It was about kings and queens and wars. Additionally, it was about states and empires, or groups of states. This is what we now call political history. The subtopics were the parts of the world For example, the history of China or of France. History has moved on somewhat, and we can learn a lot about current views of history by looking at the proposed lecture topics in our leading universities. In fact, you'll see that even the simplest definition of history, that it is about what happened in the past, is up for grabs. Some of the more, how shall I put it, progressive areas of study are as much about what should happen in the future. One example of this is the field of postmodern history. Likewise, feminist history looks at the past to make sure the future will be different, and it uses the past to assist in its efforts to make the future as it wants it to be. Somewhere in the middle of these two extremes lie a range of areas of study which have developed over the modern period, replacing the traditional idea of political history. These are by now mostly well established. You can study social history or economic history. Social history asks about the ordinary people and their lives, not just their daily lives, but their contribution to changes in our society. Ordinary people have desires and wishes which they try to put into effect, and this has a massive effect on social development which was not fully understood in the traditional study of history. By the way, one area of traditional history which I forgot to mention, but which has had a resurgence of interest in recent years, is the area of military history. This was, of course, of great practical use in more violent times, and unfortunately has become of increasing use and interest, academically and practically, in our own times. By the way, there is a new series of lectures on military history in our department, as if to demonstrate the truth of what I've just said. Ethnic and multicultural history are further examples of kinds of history which, like social history, differ from the traditional forms. Ethnic history is a modern concern which concentrates on the value systems and beliefs of a people, usually a minority people, which were ignored in the rapid forward march of the rich and powerful nations and states. How various ethnic groups live together and how their traditions change and develop is the subject of its contemporary cousin, multicultural history. In sum, as I said, you are fortunate to have such a wide choice of things to study in the fields of history. Choose wisely. And finally, it only remains for me to wish you good luck in your studies.
That is the end of part 3.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Now turns to part 4.
Part 4. For my project, I chose to look at a subject which has interested me for a long time. Why is it that some people are much happier than others, more upbeat and optimistic?
First, you have some time to look at questions 31 to 40. Now listen carefully and answer questions 31 to 40.
For my project, I chose to look at a subject which has interested me for a long time. Why is it that some people are much happier than others, more upbeat and optimistic. I should say that I regard myself as a very happy person, and so are most of my family, as far as I know. But that wasn't the reason why I chose this project. Some people think that nowadays we're becoming more depressed than we used to be, but I'm not convinced by that. And I came across some interesting research which tries to look at the subject from a positive point of view. It emerged from a movement called the science of well-being, and I decided I wanted to investigate it for my project because it involves several different types of factors. It can be viewed not just from the mental or physical side, but also from the social perspective. Now, in a large-scale study of several thousand people of different ages, researchers found three main characteristics which appeared again and again in people who identified themselves as happy. The most significant factor was that you don't have to be someone who does something brilliant, discovers penicillin or composes a symphony, for example. But happy people do seem to know what their strengths are. This enables them to make the best of themselves and not to dwell on what they're doing badly. Another striking finding was that happy people tend to be very curious, not about family gossip or things like that, but about larger issues, like current events. I remember one person the researchers interviewed had never learned to read, but he was happy because he kept up through TV news. And then, and this surprised me, people don't have to have lots of friends to be happy, but they do have to be able to appreciate what they do have, the good fortune they've had, and how different their lives could have been if they hadn't been so fortunate. Turning now to what the research says should be avoided if people are going to stay happy. The three things that stand out are as follows. First of all, reflection time on your own is good, but not if people use that time regretting mistakes and blaming themselves for everything. Another point is that people shouldn't worry about getting angry sometimes. It's part of what makes us human, and it can be healthy. But they shouldn't always try to find fault with others. This leads to a great deal of negativity. And the final thing which should be avoided if a person is going to be happy is always trying to compete. Of course, it can be fun to try to beat another person in a game, but not if this becomes your only aim. It's much better to enjoy taking part in the game rather than being obsessive about winning it. Now, I've tried to do a lot of reading on the subject of well-being research, and I have to say it does have its critics. It's widely accepted that this positive approach does help us understand what happiness is and why some people are very unhappy. However, this has been dealt with many times before. The critics basically say that it's the old science under a new name, with only very small changes in approach. Well, that might be the case. It may bring us very little closer to finding out exactly how our brains work. But I think that sometimes even a very small change in perspective can bring real and long-lasting benefits. Above all, I feel that well-being research might help us to move away from simply prescribing drugs for depression. It helps us to explore alternative ways of dealing with unhappiness. I'd like to finish my short presentation by mentioning one of the people who was interviewed by the research team. Ada Clark is exactly 100 years old and still going strong, still giving piano recitals in her local town. She regards herself as a very happy person, and that this positive spirit has kept her healthy over her long life. But the reason I'm mentioning her now is because not one of the factors she says makes her happy is on the list I mentioned before. Every human life is unique, and we cannot guarantee what will make each one of us happy.
That is the end of part 4.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.